Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. My name is Wesley Pinkham. I'm the show's producer, and welcome to Thursdays with Friends. This is an online conversation about current issues. Topic this week is environmental rollbacks and climate change. This program, I think that was last week's topic. This week we're talking about the COVID-19 package and how that affects working families and everyone just trying to make it through this pandemic. So this program is brought to you by the Friends Committee on National Legislation, which is a national nonpartisan Quaker organization that lobbies Congress for peace, justice, and environmental stewardship. We're so excited all of you were able to join us, and I'm very, very excited to pass it over to Amelia Kegan, who is taking over the hosting for Diane Randall. Amelia is FCNL's legislative director for domestic policy, and Diane is out on a little vacation, a little leave, much deserved. And Amelia is joined by Amy Matsui, who is director of income security, as well as senior counsel at the National Women's Law Center. We're so excited to have both of you, and Amy is our first outside guest. And so welcome so much to the Thursdays with Friends.
Thank you, Wesley. And it is great to be with all of you here today. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's wonderful to see all of your faces. And I have to say, you are in for a treat. We have got an incredible guest with us, with Amy here today. But first, I just want to thank all of you on this call for all of your support for this work and for FCNL. When I'm on the Hill, it is the calls, the emails, the visits that you're doing, and the support that you're providing FCNL that really makes us effective in this work. So as Wesley said, our chat this afternoon focuses on the next COVID package. And this is it. This is the last COVID bill that we're going to see before the elections, likely the year, and there is a lot riding on this. So we are so fortunate to have Amy Matsui joining us to give us an update on where things are and what you can do. As Wesley said, Amy's senior legal counsel and director of income security at the National Women's Law Center, and at FCNL, we do a lot of work in coalition, and it's this type of collaboration with organizations like the Law where we're coordinating on messaging and talking points and lobby visits that really make us really effective in our work. So the Law Center is an incredible partner, and Amy, she is one of the foremost experts in Washington on economic justice issues. She's regularly called to testify before Congress. She's often at work behind the scenes, working with legislators on crafting legislation and advising congressional offices and working with so many of our coalition partners. So we are so fortunate to have Amy with us. Amy, welcome to Thursdays with Friends. Thank you for being here. And maybe perhaps you could just start by telling us a little bit about the National Women's Law Center and your work there.
Thank you so much for that very generous and warm introduction, Amelia. It is, we are always so proud and happy to be working in partnership with FCNL. And in particular, it's a privilege and pleasure for me personally to get to work with Amelia on the economic issues that really impact women, working families, children, and really the people who are struggling the most in this economy to make ends meet, much less succeed. So as Amelia and Wesley mentioned, I'm the director of income security at the National Women's Law Center and also senior counsel there. The National Women's Law Center is a public policy organization that for the past 45 years has worked hard to advance opportunities for women and girls in many spheres of their lives. We work with trying to use the law in all of its different forms to affect culture change, legal change, policy change, to break down the barriers that affect all of us that gender and racial inequity place in our path. So for all of those reasons, the FCNL is such a key partner in that work. We share so many of the same values, and we so appreciate being able to work on economic policy, both in the human impact that it brings, but also kind of as a moral imperative for what the hardworking families we seek to represent in policy need and deserve to succeed. So again, just so delighted to be with all of you today.
Thanks, Amy. And I just want to remind folks as we go through this, those of you who have been on this before know you can enter any questions you have in the chat box throughout the conversation. So we'll get to those, that Q&A session later on. So Amy, we've got just a couple weeks until Congress heads out on its August recess. There's all this talk about this next COVID bill. Can you share a little bit about what's happening in Congress regards to this next package? And we know that the House passed the HEROES Act, the Senate hasn't acted. What's the latest? What's going on?
So basically right now we're waiting for the Senate to act. As you all may know, the House and Senate both have been out on recess for the past couple of weeks, but we are expecting the Senate to produce its version of the next, and as Amelia mentioned, probably the last for the near future COVID relief bill. We're expecting that in probably the first half of next week. We have heard that the Republicans who are drafting their version of the legislation have not kind of started from the part of the HEROES Act. And so we're concerned that the Senate's approach is not going to be as robust and provide what families need and households need and women need across the country to make it through the health and economic crisis that we're currently facing. So specifically what we're hearing is that the Republican leadership, who is kind of in charge of putting the first version of the Senate's legislation on the table, first and foremost wants to limit the size of the bill. The HEROES Act that was passed by the House contained about $3 trillion of assistance. And in contrast, the Senate's intention has been stated so far as keeping the size of the package to about $1 trillion, so about a third of the size. This is deeply troubling just because we know the scope of human suffering and kind of what people need. And we also feel like the approach should be to try and, make sure that people can make ends meet, make sure that people who are unemployed can make it through this crisis until it's safe for them to go back to work, their kids to go back to school, for childcare to reopen. And then there's so much kind of additional support that's needed, whether it's for health coverage to help schools either operate remotely or have the staff and cleaning supplies and what they need to operate and keep kids safe there. We just think that it is a backwards look through the telescope to focus on the size of the package rather than the scope of the need. So there are some promising signs in what has been discussed as possible components of the next COVID relief package that the Senate is designing. We've heard them mention that they're considering an additional round of direct stimulus payments to individuals that may be targeted towards lower income households. We've also heard that, especially with kind of the expectation that unemployment is going to inch up again to even further historic levels, that there may be some additional unemployment relief. And we've also heard that there will be a focus on opening schools safely. That being said, we're also hearing kind of some more concerning priorities emerge. For example, Senate Republicans have said that they're very concerned about trying to make sure that employers don't face liability if they, for example, bring their workers back, but they get sick or they didn't have the kind of protection they needed or cleaning or other supplies. There's a concern for making sure that those employers are not facing lawsuits. In addition, we've also heard that there are some tax cuts that the White House and that Senate Republicans have been pushing, which again aren't well targeted towards the families that we think are struggling the most. And these include things like a payroll tax credit, which could affect the solvency of Social Security, which is such a bedrock economic support program for so many of us, and something like a capital gains cut, which mean that the taxes that people pay on the increases for their assets and investments would be lowered. And again, that's just not something that everyday families are facing that would also help them get through a recession. So we are hoping that, whatever we see come out next week from the Senate has more relief than what has been kind of telegraphed to date. And then that it could go through further negotiations and changes before it comes up for a vote in the Senate. After that, just to be clear, it would still have to be passed through the House. So there may be some additional changes that would happen there. And the House leadership has said that they would delay going out on their August recess until this next package is passed. So that is at least good news that the priority is placed on making sure that this next COVID relief package makes it through both houses of Congress and then can get signed into law.
Thanks, Amy. That's super comprehensive and really, really helpful kind of context of where things are. As you mentioned, there's really just a matter of weeks before that August recess hits. You already kind of touched upon this, but I wonder if there's anything more you want to say about what's really at stake in this bill. You already mentioned kind of a lot of the needs out there, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
I mean, I think the thing which is really staggering is that the bill hasn't come together before now, because we have seen really our economy fall apart. Before this, we relied very heavily on kind of the underpaid labor of a lot of folks in our community. And those are the people who've been asked to go back to work as essential workers, and they're still not getting the supports and the pay that they deserve. I think the scope of what people are experiencing, they're having trouble putting food on the table. They are at risk of, because they're missing rent and mortgage payments, they're at risk of losing their homes or being evicted. I will also mention that there are a couple of kind of deadlines that we're coming up against right now, in addition to the August recess that Congress will be leaving for. One of those is that most state governments have a fiscal year that starts in July. We have seen that because people have lost jobs and hours of work, kind of the state sales and income tax revenues have dropped. And that means that a lot of states are facing a serious kind of financial crisis for this next fiscal year. They have asked for aid not only to kind of make up for the holes in their budget, but also to make up for some of the costs that they're facing to provide services or to administer things like unemployment insurance, which are administered through the states. So the July deadline is a critical one for states. And then in addition, you may have heard that in the CARES Act, there was expanded unemployment insurance benefits to help families and people weather the economic storms that they're facing when they've lost their jobs. So the increased kind of $600 bump in unemployment insurance expires, and states are kind of making adjustments to cut that off as early as next week. So a lot of people are going to be losing money in their budgets. States are facing a fiscal crisis. Some of the limits on preventing people from getting evicted for non-payment of rent or from bills, some of those are expiring. So we're really coming up on the fact that the health crisis has not abated. Some states did open prematurely without kind of safeguards in place. And so we're going to see an additional increase in unemployment as businesses close and folks are going to go back to not having the hours of work or their jobs. And last but not least, school districts are trying to figure out what they're going to do in the fall. And so between the advanced planning that they need to do, if they really are going to have teachers and children in classrooms starting in mid-August in some states, in addition to having kind of the childcare that parents need to make up for hybrid. So there are we're really coming up against some deadlines for funding, planning, some of the protections that were already in place. And really everything is kind of adding pressure to needing this additional package to be enacted.
Thanks, Amy. That's really helpful. And as you described, the need is just so great. The urgency is so great. And it can, when thinking about all these different things, it can feel very overwhelming. As folks on this call are advocates, if there are just, a couple policy recommendations, we've spent a lot of time talking the SNAP and the need to increase SNAP benefits and some of these previous calls, but what are some of the things that at the Law Center you're working on and that you're looking at, just a couple policies that need to be included in this next bill that can make a real difference?
Thanks, Amelia. I mean, I think as you note, what we're really seeing now is the understandable consequence of an economy that had a lot of cracks in it. And so it really is showing the decades of underinvestment. And unfortunately, what that means is that it takes a lot of relief to kind of put this economy back together and hopefully on a better footing so that we're not finding ourselves repeatedly. This is obviously an unprecedented crisis, but a lot of families were really struggling paycheck to paycheck to keep their families afloat. So a couple of policies that the Law Center specifically is working on in this huge mix of supports that people need. We have been really focused on childcare, and that is because many childcare providers, as many of you may know, really are operating on the thinnest of margins. Childcare workers and providers are generally very underpaid. Much of that work is done by women and by women of color historically, and many of them are making less than $11 an hour. With kind of additional restrictions where you want children to social distance, you want there to be enough cleaning and protective supplies to keep children safe as childcare centers and providers reopen, there are additional costs there. And so there really is a need, obviously, to revamp our childcare system so that families can access the high quality childcare that they need for their children's development and to go to work, but also so that childcare workers are well paid and have the supports they need. Right now, during the pandemic, our researchers calculated that it would take $9 billion a month to keep the childcare system afloat during the pandemic. And that is really a sign that we have underinvested in this critical sector. But what we want to make sure is that as families are going back to work, as providers are going back to work, as children are leaving their homes, everybody is safe and supported. And so we're calling for a lot of additional childcare funding. In addition to that, we've been just so privileged to kind of advocate by your side for refundable tax credits like the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit to be expanded. We know that these tax credits are targeted towards families with low incomes, and those are the ones that need to have kind of their incomes boosted even more to keep them above the poverty line. And we know during ordinary times that these tax credits provide refunds and money back in people's pockets that improves health outcomes, it keeps people employed, and it even increases the future education and outcome employment outcomes for children. On top of that, these are some of the most kind of race and gender equitable provisions in the tax code because women of color are so overrepresented in low paid work like care work or retail or restaurants. And that's the reason that so many women of color especially benefit from these tax credits. And so I think our viewpoint there is that these are tax credits that put money back in people's pockets. It can help cushion the financial crisis that they're facing in their households. And it really does target the families who are struggling the most. And so with those kind of supports in mind, obviously, along with many others, and childcare, those are some of the priority issues that the Law Center is advocating for.
Thanks, Amy. So I just want to remind everyone to, if you've got questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Gosh, there's just so much I want to ask you, Amy, and we have such a limited time, but I wonder if you could just speak a bit to, the Law Center. You kind of touched on this, but the Law Center has been doing a lot of work around racial justice and gender justice issues, especially looking at tax justice through those lenses. But I wonder if you could comment a bit more about kind of the racial justice and gender justice piece to all of this.
So I would be happy to. We're in a moment, obviously, where racial justice is a national conversation and one that really deeply needs to happen. One thing that people may not think about with the tax code is that it does have, like every other system, it can exacerbate and reinforce racial inequity as well as gender inequity. And in part, that's because it builds on employment patterns that have deep discrimination in them, the disparities in wealth that women and people of color face are also kind of increased and exacerbated by the tax code. And so what that gives us the opportunity to do is to look at the tax code as a system that instead has the potential to increase racial and gender equity. We can stop it from kind of giving more wealth to people who are already wealthy, and maybe restructure the incentives that it provides and the benefits that it provides to make our economy more equitable. So this is the tax code is a system of law, and nowhere does it say that women get taxed more or less than men, or people of color face different tax rates. But the impact of the tax system does have very strong race and gender differences. And so our hope is that taking that specific look at the tax code and those impacts and places where biases are baked in can help us dismantle and make the code more equitable and our economy one that works for everybody.
Thanks, Amy. First, I want to note that Stephen has put in the chat a link to our Take Action page, so you can just click on that link and right here, right after this chat, go and email your members of Congress about this very issue. So we encourage you to do that and to, of course, personalize that email to the extent that you can. We have Ian here has asked, any chance of helping people get unemployment? Some states haven't paid out unemployment yet. I don't know if you could speak to that at all.
No, and that is really, as I mentioned, and as all of you know, states administer their unemployment insurance. And what some states have done is to limit, especially since the last Great Recession, the kind of help that's available. And some have even made it more difficult for people to apply, possibly on the theory that if you offer people supports when they've lost their jobs, that they might be less eager to go back to work. I think that we have definitely never seen evidence of that. And we've actually seen that people who are getting the increased unemployment benefits are trying harder to go back to work now. So, unfortunately, people are still, as you know, waiting in the queue when they've applied for benefits. Some of those are still getting processed. But it's still very important for people to go through and complete the application process so that when the backlog has cleared, they can retroactively get their benefits. I think that some of the state fiscal aid that we're hoping will be in the Senate bill could also be used to help with to fund some of those extra administrative costs, like for funding SNAP or for administering unemployment insurance. And obviously every little bit of funding helps, but I know it's very hard to tell people who are waiting for unemployment insurance benefits to kind of just keep checking and go back to their states and make sure that their applications are complete in this time of such deep need. But that's the best kind of advice that I've heard, at least, people to continue to stay in the queue and make sure that their applications are complete when they can.
Thanks, Amy. Another question that, I just popped up in the chat is, how do you, speaking specifically about homelessness, I know this isn't necessarily your focus area, but maybe if you have any comments of how to avoid potential increase in homelessness due to evictions.
So the CARES Act and many states had kind of a moratorium on evictions. Unfortunately, a lot of those are starting to expire. So there are both, in your local community, in your state, it may be possible to advocate on the state level to make sure that people aren't kicked out of their homes in a time where they don't have the resources to rent another place, and they may not be finding anywhere to be able to go. In addition, there is the ask has been made to have additional funds to help with housing assistance and additional resources to kind of help rehouse people who do find themselves homeless. But again, the concern is that getting that amount of assistance under an arbitrary cap is really worrisome. And so there is both kind of federal advocacy that can be done in the trying to get more housing assistance in the next round of the Senate's relief bill, but there may also be room in local areas to advocate to continue the bar on evicting people for failure to pay rent or mortgage.
Yeah, and talking about that arbitrary cap, that's certainly something that we've been talking about when I've been going into offices and talking about we really need a package that responds to the need that's out there and not just putting up some number that that would be too small. Another question for you, Amy, is, we have this COVID package, but this recession, the Congressional Budget Office is predicting unemployment rates at about averaging 10% through 2021. We know this crisis is going to persist for some time, and we have, we don't know what the results of the elections will be, but I'm sure many people are looking to 2021 and thinking about there will probably be the need for another recovery package in in the new year. And you kind of spoke to some of the structural issues that have been unmasked or further highlighted by this COVID bill. I wonder if you'd like to speak more to some of those and some of the bigger things that we need to do to get our economy to a place where it really needs to be.
It's a really big question, but I think the scope of the need can do two things. It can paralyze us by the long list of specific policies that we need to get everyone kind of on a sound financial footing, to get people healthy and safe and ready to kind of move on to and access opportunities. I do think that when we're faced with a crisis of this magnitude, though, it offers us the opportunity to reimagine what could be and how could it be better. So I think, look forward to being in partnership with FCNL and other and coalition partners to think about how can we reinvest the resources that we have so that we're focused on making sure that people can make ends meet and have a life where they have dignity and economic stability and can access opportunity for themselves and their children. I think that we have the opportunity to revisit some places where we have been investing, and maybe we can make those investments someplace that addresses a different set of values. And on top of that, I also think that this gives us an opportunity to think about how everybody is contributing to making sure that the economy works for everyone. Can we raise revenues in a fair and equitable way so that we don't see very wealthy people just getting wealthier while people are struggling to put food on the table? And so it won't happen at once, but I think it's really important that as we're looking at the short-term relief to help people make ends meet and have a basic level of existence, that we're thinking about building on that. That should not be the floor and that should not be the ceiling. We need to use our imagination and the kind of the values that we espouse to think about how we can do this differently and better. I think if we don't, we're going to simply be fighting the same battles in different forms every time we hit a crisis, no matter what that crisis is. And we can do better than that.
Well said. Amy, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I want to note that Jim did put in the chat a link to, virtual lobbying. We know that kind of actually talking, whether it might be virtually, not necessarily in the room with your members of Congress, but getting on the phone with them can make a huge, huge difference. And we will walk you through that. We want to make it so easy for you to do that. So you can just click on that link or go to our webpage, and an FCNL person will get in contact with you and help you schedule that lobby visit. So I just want to thank Amy, and really thank all of you for spending the time, and as I said, all of your support for this work for FCNL. Amy talked about the moral kind of implications of the work that we do, and coming into offices, bringing our faith to these conversations is really impactful and really powerful, and I think is so necessary, especially FCNL's style of lobbying in this time. So I want to thank you all for just your time and all of your support, for being with us today. Join us. Our next Thursdays with Friends will be Thursday, August 6th at 4 p.m. Eastern. It will be the 75th anniversary of the horrific bombing of Hiroshima. And as many of you know, today, July 16th, marks the 75th anniversary of the explosion of the world's first nuclear bomb, called the Trinity, in New Mexico. So that is in 2 weeks again, and your regular host, Diane, will be back with you then. But thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Amy, and we look forward to being in touch with all of you.